Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
Last night, all alone in a bar room, I met a man with a drink in his hand, almost persuaded by Tanya Tucker. "Hey, pretty lady, how about a dance?" The band was playing Georgia Rag, an old song by Webb Pierce that hardly anyone plays anymore. It was a great ragtime number with a strong beat, perfect for dancing, and a catchy melody. I looked up and saw a cowboy dressed up in his dancing finery. He had on a new-looking Stetson hat, well-worn but clean Levi's and Justin boots, and a pale blue shirt with red trim around a collar and pockets. The buttons on the shirt were mother of pearl with a faint pinkish tint. From my viewpoint sitting down, he looked rather tall, with big brown eyes and coal black hair that looked more than a little curly where it poked out from under his hat. He stood with a bottle of Shiner Bock in his hand, waiting for my answer, a smile on his face that any girl would understand. I hesitated for a minute, shrugged my shoulders, and stood up. He put his beer on the table and promptly started whirling me around the room. I felt flushed and a bit dizzy, but somehow exhilarated. The band went into the chorus, and I smiled as I listened. The Georgia moon, it was shining. It seemed to smile from above, but now my heart keeps on pining to tell her once more of my love. 2 or 3 more songs went by in what seemed a moment. The band leader announced that after a slow song, they were going to take a break. They kicked in with a slow ballad, and I started to walk back to my table, but Glenn, that's what he told me his name was, put his strong arms around me and pulled me close. I resisted half-heartedly, then put my head on his shoulder and let him lead. Lost in the moment, I remembered. I had known Billy all my life. His dad and mine were both oil riggers, and we were neighbors in 2 small houses on the outskirts of Bartlesville, Oklahoma. When Billy got to high school, he spent summers working with his dad, and when we graduated, he started working for the same company as our dads. We got married as soon as he started working, and with our folks' help, we were able to buy a small 1-bedroom place of our own, a couple of miles from where our parents lived. We were happy and had a good life, even though Billy worked hard and often came home exhausted. It was dangerous work, and I worried about him all the time. I got a job working part-time in the office of the same company where Billy and our dads worked. It was a small company, family-owned and operated, and they made everyone feel like they were part of family. About 18 months after we were married, we had a baby girl. We named her Sarah after Sarah Carter of the Carter family. We listened to them on the radio all the time, and I loved her voice. I stopped working, and life was pretty good for us. Then the war came. The main effect on our families was that the need for oil was critical, and a lot of pressure was applied by the government to discover new oil fields and make them productive as soon as possible. Everyone had to work more hours, and I started working full-time with either my mom or Billy's mom taking care of Sarah. It put a strain on our lives and our marriage. We were too tired to go out much, and Billy was taken to falling asleep on the sofa right after dinner. We weren't worried too much about the war taking our men from us because oil was a critical industry and not subject to the draft. Then, in the spring of 1943, Billy and I had our first big fight. He came home one night flushed from a couple of beers. The damn fool had enlisted when he didn't have to. He was adamant. "Kitty, I have to do this. This is my country, and I want to do my part." "But, Billy, you've been doing more than your share just in helping with the supply of oil." "Honey, I'm going to go. Just help me on this." We went to bed mad at each other and didn't make love. The next morning, Billy was quiet and left with a quick kiss and a hug. "Kitty, I won't be able to live with myself if I don't do this." "I'm sorry." Another kiss, and Billy said goodbye to Sarah. And then he was gone. When he got to the reception center, they assigned him to the Marines. He didn't even get a chance to come home before he shipped out to the Pacific Theater. He didn't even know where he was going, just over the ocean somewhere. I missed him. I was by turns angry with him and wanting him something fierce. I hadn't had a kiss or hug, let alone more, in almost 6 months. Glenn took my arm and said, "Hey, are you okay? You went away somewhere." I looked around, and we were standing alone in the middle of the dance floor. He held a chair out for me, then went to the bar for a couple more beers. He came back and sat down without asking. I didn't mind. I was lonely and wanted to have someone to talk to dance with. Glenn placed his hands over mine, holding them while looking at me. I found myself wanting to kiss him. I'd heard an expression once, temptation was flowing like wine. That was how I felt. Just Glenn holding my hands made me feel like I'd had 1 glass of wine too many, and my temptation was making me feel lethargic. My eyes felt heavy, like nothing mattered. I was almost persuaded to strip myself of my pride, to push my conscience aside. We danced again, I don't know how much later it was. It was a slow number, and he pulled me close and whispered in my ear, "I need you. Let me take you away and be your man tonight." I stepped back and looked into his eyes, and I saw it, the reflection of my wedding band. I turned and ran out the door to Billy's truck. I sat there crying for a long time. I'd almost been persuaded to let strange lips lead me on, but Billy's sweet love made me stop and go home. The next morning, early, on Tuesday, November 23rd, 1943, my life ended. The boy delivering the telegram couldn't have been more than 16, but he brought a message older than time. "Your husband, William James Dixon, is missing in action and presumed dead." The telegram went on to say that, during the invasion of an island in the Pacific, Billy's squad was separated from the company and caught in a mortar attack by the Japanese. They had found all the bodies but Billy's, and he was assumed to have died in the attack. I collapsed to the floor, crying hysterically, my pain made worse by what I had almost done the night before. I didn't know what the time differences were or anything, but I was convinced that Billy had been killed while I was dancing with Glenn. I had killed him. I was still laying there, sobbing, the door still open, when my mom came. "Laws a mercy, child, what's the matter?" I handed her the telegram and started crying again. She sat down and hugged me. "Kitty, I know how it is for you." "No, it's worse than that, Ma. I killed him. I killed him." She let me cry for a while, holding me and saying soothing words while patting my back. "Kitty, child, go put some coffee on, and I'll take care of Sarah." A few minutes later, Sarah now too was fed and playing on a quilt on the kitchen floor. I told my mom what I'd almost done at the tavern the night before, of how I felt I had killed my Billy. "Kitty, what you done was wrong. I can't say it weren't. But, child, you didn't kill Billy. The war killed him. I'm glad you came home when you did. Thanks to God for that." We sat and drank coffee, Sarah blissfully ignorant and happy playing on the floor. I started trying to put my life back together, hating myself for my almost betrayal. Meanwhile, Billy in bloody Tarawa. Casualties many, percentage of dead not known, combat efficiency, we are winning. Colonel David M. Shoup, Tarawa, November 21st, 1943. I hated the way I left Kitty and little Sarah. I know she was upset, but this was something important to me. The night before I left, we stopped at the bar, and my buddies brought me a few beers. We were having fun, but truth be told, I think most of them wished they were going with me. A guy at the bar asked me, "Are you one of those patriots?" I know he was just jawing at me, but I gave him a hard look and said, "Yes, sir, mister. I love my country, and I'm proud of it." He turned back to the bar. I guess he was embarrassed. I was sure surprised when I got to the reception center, and after all the testing and such I was told I was going to be a Marine. I hadn't thought about that, but it sounded fine to me. They sent me on the train to San Diego for boot camp. There was a group of about 30 of us from Texas and Oklahoma. When we arrived in San Diego, we jumped off the train singing the Marine hymn. We were proud to be Marines. There was a group of battle-seasoned non-coms standing there, and they quickly disabused us of any notion that we were real Marines. Looking back at it, the two most important things in boot camp were our rifles and our drill sergeant. We had to immediately memorize our serial number, and woe be to the man that forgot it. I remember one thing I thought at the time was funny. One of the recruits goofed up and called his rifle a gun. The sergeant stared him down and then grabbed his rifle from him. I'm going to tell y'all once and once only. Alternately holding up the grunt's rifle, then pointing to his groin, he shouted, "This is my rifle. This is my gun. This is for fighting. This is for fun." Then he took us for a long run with our rifles at port arms. The poor guy that dared call his darling a gun wound up sleeping with it for a week. I was in good shape. Working as a rigger is hard work. But the physical effort they put us through left me sore for weeks. We learned the usual things I would have expected, and some I didn't. For example, I learned an amazingly rich vocabulary of words I could never say around Mom. Within days, I was cussing up a storm with the best of the drill instructors. The first day, when our DI told us how it was going to be, one thing he said stuck with me. He walked up and down the rows, staring each of us in the eye. Standing in front again, an unmistakable look of disgust on his face, he said, "Okay. I want everyone that thinks he is a man to take 2 steps forward." We nervously looked at each other, and then en masse we all took 2 steps to the front. God damn it. You all are just boys. There ain't a man among you. I'm going to break you down in pieces. Then when you are nothing, I'm going to put y'all back together again. When I'm finished, you can be proud to say that you are both a man and a Marine. One thing I learned early is that a recruit could never win. Every day, there would be an inspection by the DI. He always gigged me on something, and I swore to myself that before boot camp was over, I'd pass inspection. I worked really hard at it, and gradually I did better and better. I knew I was close when the only thing he found was a tiny bit of brass polish on the inside of my belt buckle. The next day, I knew I was going to be the first one in our training group not to be gigged. He checked everything and then made me take my belt buckle off. He held it up to the sun and looked inside, and I could swear he smiled a little. He handed the buckle back, and I put the belt back on while he stood there waiting. I knew he was going to say something to the recruits and use me as a good example. Now, the DI was a big guy, maybe 6'2", and running a lean-to 20. He put his face in mine and yelled, "Have you been sleeping with my wife?" This scared the hell out of me. With his spittle all over my face, I tremulously answered, "No, sir. I wouldn't touch your wife." I knew as soon as I said it that it was the wrong thing to say. "What? My wife isn't good enough for you." I did lots of extra running that day. I learned from that it was better to be almost perfect but leave one obvious thing and take the punishment. We learned what they told us we had to know to survive. Most of the boys from Texas and Oklahoma, except for the ones from the city, had no trouble shooting expert with our Springfield '03 rifles. We had endless training on bayonet drills. Finally, we were Marines. Several weeks later, I shipped out, headed for New Zealand to join the 2nd Marine Division, 35 miles from Wellington by train. They were recuperating, refitting, and training after the intense fight at Guadalcanal. It was a beautiful place, and the residents loved us. Quite a few of the men that had been there for some time married local women before we shipped out on the troop transport. I guess the troops that were in New Zealand before us had it pretty easy and had a lot of fun. At about the same time I got there, Colonel Edson came in as Chief of Staff for the Commanding General Julian Smith. Edson immediately implemented a rigorous training program to put us in peak fighting shape. He focused on several areas he thought were critical: individual initiative, fire discipline, and above all, keep moving forward, always forward. By late October, when the training ended, over 50 Marines died from training accidents or overexertion. But morale was high, and we knew we were ready for whatever awaited us. At that time, we had no idea of where we were going. Just before we debarked, some mail caught up with us, and I had 3 letters from Kitty. In one, there were several pictures of her and Sarah. Reading the letters gave me a strong dose of loneliness, but still, I knew I was doing the right thing for me. At last, we got on the troop transports and started towards whatever destiny awaited us. It came to us that it was serious business when the platoon leader came around and made sure we all had wills. We stopped at Efate in the New Hebrides Islands to practice beach landings. Somewhere in the middle of the South Pacific, we finally found out where we were going. For years afterward, I could still hear the briefing officer. "We have been assigned the task of taking Bidio, an island in the Tarawa Atoll. Let me tell you about it and why it is imperative that we take it. Before I start, let me tell you one thing. It has been said that it would take 1 million soldiers to take that island. It is so heavily fortified. Well, we don't have 1 million soldiers, but we do have a division of Marines. Bidio is a small island, about 1 square mile. It's 700 yards wide at its widest and about 2 miles long. For those of you from New York, it's about half the size of Central Park. There is no point on Tarawa more than 10 feet above sea level. Now, we had no interest in taking this island. It had no strategic importance, so we were just going to bypass it. Then the Japs built an airstrip, and everything changed. That 1,500-foot-long landing strip controls thousands of square miles of ocean around the Tarawa Atoll. They have almost 5,000 troops guarding Bidio, with guns up to 8 inches and a large number of anti-aircraft guns and entrenched machine guns. He went on to talk about specific assignments and various things he felt we needed to know. Later, our company commander went over our part in a lot more detail. What all of our intelligence gathering hadn't discovered was what was camouflaged or underground, and how erratic the tides were. Both of these were to cause us a large number of fatalities. The date of the assault, November 20th, turned out to be a neap tide for the island. Neap tides occur during the first and third quarters of the moon and generally have less water than at full tide. This meant the expected 5 feet of clearance over the reefs guarding Bidio would be more like 3 feet and not enough for the landing crafts. The first wave was to use Amtracs. They could crawl over an exposed reef. The later waves of the larger landing craft would have to let their troop wade ashore the 500 yards from the reefs to the beach. So it turned out that the bulk of the Marines landing were exposed to a withering fire from machine guns we thought had been cleared by the earlier bombardment. They served us breakfast at 2,000 hours on the 19th. They served us steak and eggs, a New Zealand custom. We got in our landing craft, and I was standing, looking to the east as the sun started peeping over the horizon. With no warning, a shell hit the water about 50 yards in front of our landing craft, scaring the hell out of us and drenching us with water. I spent the rest of the trip ashore huddled against the thin plywood gunnels. I was in I Company, and we were on the early Amtraks. We were to land right where Red Beach 1 and Green Beaches intersected. Our target was the pair of large 14-centimeter guns on the northwest point of BDO. My platoon and several others had no trouble reaching the beach, but when the command tractor with a company commander on board was a few feet from the shore, the captain was shot in the forehead and died instantly. The first lieutenant that took over told our platoon leader to move forward and to the right to provide protection for the flank. We moved over, staying low. The Japs had turned their anti-aircraft guns level with the gun and were raking the beach with devastating effect. We moved about 100 yards to the right, and the second lieutenant positioned our squads. My squad under Corporal Betterman was the farthest inland and about even with the big guns. A runner came up and told Betterman to try to circle around behind the big gun. We very slowly crawled up the beach, hiding in depressions when we could. We got to our position in a low area that was about a foot lower than what was around us. We were taking a breather, looking at each other, surprised, I guess, that we were still alive. What no one told us in all the training, in all the scuttlebutt and war stories we had been subjected to, no one had said how horrendous the noise was. It was disorienting and sapped the strength from us. We huddled there, awaiting instructions, when I felt a tremendous pressure. Then things went black. I came to hours later and felt an intense pain just below my left knee, and I had a tremendous headache. My left ear was bleeding but numb. It was almost dark, and I looked around. It looked like everyone in the squad was dead. At least no one was moving, and there was no question about most of them. In the faint light I could see part of my shin bone sticking through my pants, gleaming white in the faint light. I was able to get to my medical kit, and I taped up my shin as best I could. My ear was now starting to hurt, but wasn't bleeding too much. I struggled to get my helmet off and saw a huge dent on the left side, above where the ear would be. I put my hand up and felt what seemed to be an egg. I dragged myself over to the two Marines that I wasn't sure about, but they were all dead. I drifted off for a while, but awoke to hear talking nearby. I was shocked to hear them speaking Japanese. They seemed to be coming my way, so I slipped over the edge of the depression and started crawling away from the sounds. Apparently, they stopped where my squad lay shattered. I passed out again. I woke up to see a blur at my feet pulling at my boots. The movements had caused a sharp pain in my shin that must have made me aware of my surroundings. In the momentary and occasional flashes of explosions, I could see a Jap soldier tugging at my boots. I had put my bayonet back in my sheath after I used it to cut away in my pants leg, and now I slowly took it out, and as the enemy soldier reached up to search my pockets, I rammed it into his throat. I knew I had to move, so I crawled down towards the beach and found an Amtrak that had been hit with a shell. I crawled in and collapsed. I was dead for 3 weeks before I came out of the coma I'd been in. The force of the blast had blown off my dog tags, and I hadn't been identified as yet. I was on board a hospital ship, the Solace, they told me. I'd had a blood clot in my brain from the impact of whatever had hit me. A nurse in starched whites told me, "You're really lucky that Captain Gray was on board. He's a famous surgeon from the Mayo Clinic." It seemed that I should completely recover, but they were going to send me home because of the brain injury. They evacuated me to Hawaii for rehabilitation. They told me they had sent a telegram to Kitty to let her know that I was injured, but that I would be okay. It was hell waiting to get out of there and go home. It was ironic that after all that training and work that I'd fought in the war for less than a day. But still, I'd done what I felt I had to, and now I was going home. Meanwhile, Kitty. It was several weeks since I'd gotten the awful news about Billy. They were the worst weeks of my life, and I felt a great lassitude. I had to stop working. They had given me 2 weeks off, but it wasn't enough. I got through the days okay, but at night I would lay awake and relive my betrayal. Yes, I considered it a betrayal even though nothing really happened, not even a kiss. But I was in a place I shouldn't have been, and because of that I was put in a position that I should have known would lead me to temptations. Sometimes in the dark of the night, in some awful corner of my mind would come a tiny stray thought that it was better that Billy was dead That way he would never find out what I'd almost done. Then came the day. I was sitting on the porch, Sarah asleep on my lap. I saw from far away someone on a bicycle. I didn't think anything about it, but as the bike came closer, I could see the same young man that delivered the telegram. I should have hated him, but I didn't. I was surprised when he turned into my lane. He walked up and handed me another telegram. I couldn't for the life of me think what it was about. It couldn't be bad news. Billy was already dead. They couldn't kill him again. I opened the envelope, and the words leaped out at me. I almost dropped Sarah as I stood up, almost in as much shock as I had been from the first telegram. Billy was alive. I cried all over Sarah as I took her in so I could call my mom and Billy's mom. The next couple of months were hell for me as I waited for Billy to come home. I wanted him home immediately, but still, I knew I had to tell him about my temptation. The day finally came, and when Billy's train came in, all I could do was cry. After all that he had gone through, I was the one crying. We went home, and for the first few days, it seemed like someone was always there. Finally, we were alone, and I could shower my passion on him. He still had some pain and walked with a slight limp. But when I took him to the doctor at the VA center in Tulsa, he said that both would go away over time and that he could return to work whenever he wanted to. Life was great. I was able to work again, and Billy was excited about getting back to work himself. Things were good again, except for the cloud of my temptation, always on the horizon. I knew I had to talk to Billy about it, but I wanted to wait until some time had gone by. If he got real mad at me, which I expected him to do, I wanted to have him as my own again for as long as I could. About 3 months after he came home, I sat down on the sofa with him, holding his hands. I remembered the quote from Macbeth about courage, but screw up your courage to the sticking place and will not fail. So I screwed up my courage and told him everything, not trying to spare myself. He looked at me with a serious look on his face as I spilled my guts to him. When I finished, he wiped the tears from my face, picked me up, and carried me into the bedroom. His soft touch roamed everywhere, soothing me, exciting me. We made love, and then I start crying, sobbing. Still my sobs. I had been in such tension from the guilt for so long that I felt like I would explode. Billy's soft voice brought me back from perdition. Kitty, everyone gets tempted. That's human nature. We're not perfect. There were so many of my buddies that got Dear John letters that all of us were scared. I knew it would be hard on you, but in the end you stayed true. Do you remember when we read Measure for Measure in our junior year under that old bat, Mrs. Drogdigan? 'Tis one thing to be tempted, another to fall. That doesn't mean that I won't beat the crap out of this guy Glenn, if I ever see him. I laughed at that, which brought on hiccups. Billy united with me in love once again, this time with a passion we had never reached before. It's now 3 years later, and Sarah has a little brother. Once in a while I'm tempted, and I have an extra piece of pie. Once in a while Billy is tempted, and he has another beer. It's not always perfect between us, but it's damn good and we're happy together. I probably overreacted and smothered Billy with my love, but he didn't seem to be complaining. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comment section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.